identify which questions and responses they believe should be classified as not public data. So we are also looking for, beyond just general feedback, requests specific to those questions or theoretical questions on the justification of why you think it should be considered not public. So what about it makes that question lend itself to that classification? So in addition to general feedback, we're also looking for specific responses from folks explaining or justifying the classification request. So just kind of a broader comment there, and we can maybe loop back on that, and I'll finish my updates. The next thing is the scope of the needs assessment. We have this presentation today, but we would also like to continue to hear feedback as people dig in on the scope of the needs assessment. There was kind of a higher level scope included in the December 17th packet. So that took the statutory language and kind of tried to start translating it into what it actually means. So as folks sink into the scope of the needs assessment and what's ahead of us, please feel free to reach out and kind of outline how you may be better able to dig into that information. If there's additional information that you would like to see from UNOMI or the agency on the scope, let us know, and we can continue to bring that information to you all. And then as a complement to this presentation as part of the packet, there was an engagement outreach plan included from Eunomia, as well as some materials that are being developed behind the scenes to help track engagement and outreach, as well as starting to work through that scope and what's going to be done by Eunomia and its subcontractors to complete the report. So just noting that we'll be continuing to talk about the needs assessment, the scope of it, and are looking for opportunities to better help folks kind of grapple with what's going to be ahead of us in the data collection process, but also what's going to be included in that report. We are working through the preliminary assessment. We have a few things we're still trying to wrap up for that report, and we are working through reviewing it and doing our best to get it published in a timely fashion. We've got a lot of significant revisions to try to address the bulk of the board's concerns, particularly around citing methodologies and data sources. But the report still does rely on that existing data that we have, and that primary data collection is happening as part of the needs assessment. And then my last update, before I hand it off to Kirk, if he has anything to add, is that we are still working on finalizing those board members, and it's just taking a minute with the holidays and everything in between, and we've continued to request that review. So that is still in process. And Kirk, if there's anything you'd like to add.
It's Kirk on MPCA. Just want to add on to what Mallory talked about in terms of the data privacy. We know this is a very important interest to many folks. There are statutes that govern this. So just to build on what Mallory said, when you're making your justification on why you'd like us basically to predetermine that this is protected data, is if you could look at the statute too in the law and what type of conditions that are met. So not only your justification on how you tie it back to law, because that's what we will be doing, Mallory and the team and our legal folks, to make those predeterminations that it's protected data. We have done this in other cases on things such as end markets and also some things on pricing. But if there are other areas we're very curious what that is, it will just help us speed along the process. That still allows, as you're filling out the questionnaire, or excuse me, the survey when it's actually out in the various meetings, that we could still have that conversation. It's just longer in that process, very specific. So just wanted to add on that a detail.
It's a very common practice because oftentimes I remember as a grants administrator, people would say that something was private data when in fact it was not. And so it's a pretty easy process, because it is governed by statute. So it's clear what you can and cannot do, but you need to know that ahead of time. So, I don't think that that's going to be cumbersome in any way for folks. They're probably used to it. Okay, I want to take some time here because I know that first of all, Mallory, were you done? Sorry.
Yes, agency updates are complete.
The survey and stakeholder outreach compilation document is the survey questions, basically. I know that the comments are due back tomorrow. I have to tell you that in reading through it, I was disappointed. I don't know what else to say. It is very difficult to read. I thought, well, maybe since I know counties pretty well, I'll look at the county section and see what that feels like to me. And the questions, they were very specific, but then not. I've never seen a survey that had that many questions that someone was expected to fill out and get back and really be able to garner the information that we need as far as what is the current state of affairs, how do you handle this, trying to fulfill the requirements within the statute and not go beyond that. So then I had trouble even with the county one, and I thought, if you sent this to a county staff person, and I want to hear from other folks here too, because it doesn't matter which area you're in. I found it confusing. And I thought I would hate to be the staff person that got the job of trying to answer the questions. It didn't seem like any survey that I had ever worked with before. And so, but generally speaking, I wasn't the one filling out those questionnaires. That was staff doing that. Because I was a commissioner. I think the comments that came from the National Waste and Recycling Association are, and that was provided to us yesterday. I thought that they were very well spoken as far as what their questions were, and talking about trying to obtain the most useful and representative information. And I'll just quote from their letter here. To obtain the most useful and representative information, the survey should be limited to questions that clearly align with the statute and focus on data that is necessary for program implementation. And there were some things even within it that I thought, okay, well, what about for counties, for example? What about the reuse areas that you have in the environmental service centers? What about the fix-it clinics? How does that fit into all of this? And I didn't see a way to even answer that from a county perspective. I don't know. You know what? I'm going to be quiet for a moment because I want to hear from other folks if you had a chance to look at it, and hopefully you have, what you thought of it. And I'd like to hear different perspectives as well. And if somebody thought it was just an absolutely perfect survey, then I will back off and say, all right. Okay, you got to speak up now because this is going to be happening pretty soon here. Sydney.
Yeah, hi everyone. This is Sydney Harris with Upstream. Thanks, Madam Chair. I heard you mention reuse, and so I perked up. I also looked at the survey with MAC from a reuse lens, and we suggested to MPCA that there should be some reuse questions in at least every one of these surveys. So there are some reuse questions that are pretty high level in the county survey, and then they don't get repeated for the cities or the collectors or MRFs, et cetera. And I think that there's no way, well, no, I know that there's no way for us to confidently say what the baseline is if we're not asking everyone. So I think just even some high level questions like the ones in the county survey, but adapted to each entity that's receiving it is one thing that we'd love to see. And we also talked about, but Mac, let me know if I'm forgetting anything. We also talked about it being probably needed to survey directly reuse service providers like our world. I'll let them speak for themselves, but you have some of those in the state, and you also have some like covered materials adjacent reuse programs like the ones you mentioned. Transfer stations might have like reuse depots and things like that. And I think to get a full baseline, you really are going to want to have data on what is going on. And in addition to that, what is the potential for future engagement in reuse as this law rolls out? So a question not just about whether people interact with reusables today, but also about whether they have any interest or would have any interest or future plans in doing that in the future. If there were more reusables on the market, is also really key. And I'll let Mac jump in if I missed anything.
Yeah, for sure. Hi, everyone. Max Sellers from Our World. I would just say, in the law, there's a lot of data that's supposed to be acquired around reuse. And some of that data is like reuse and return rates, existing and proposed targets, proposals for getting more and more reuse and waste reduction, proposed plans and metrics for measuring progress, an inventory of the current system, including infrastructure, capacity, performance, costs, availability, investments needed, options for third-party certification, education programs around use, best practices for education, and so on and so forth. It's a pretty hefty list. So I think part of the conversation that we'd like to foster around the survey, knowing that the survey is not going to necessarily be the exhaustive place for all data inquiries about reuse, but are we lined up to be asking the right questions in this survey to get towards those pretty exhaustive data requirements in the law? We're just hoping that reuse doesn't sort of get sidelined in the conversation when recycling and composting will take up quite a bit of time.
Okay, I have Kirk, Miriam, and John.
So this is Kirk from MPCA. I would just a great conversation and definitely one need to be had today. Wonder if we could go through Eunomia's and CA's presentation. It might provide a little bit more context on this and then just pick this up there. Want to have this conversation, have time built in for it, but maybe it would help provide some information on why certain things are being asked. I do think it's important to hear it because that's the goal here. That's why we shared the survey first, is to see, are these the right things? Do they make sense to folks, to help speed up the second portion, which is actually taking the survey and that. So really appreciate you bringing this up, Chair, and appreciate hearing that there are some spots where a lot more work needs to be done. Just thought if we could hold it off until after the presentations, it might help.
Well, and that was my original plan, but then it was brought up in the updates. So that's how come I did that.
No problem.
I'll have John and Miriam, and there's one more hand up there, and then we will kind of put this on pause, go through the rest, and pick up the conversation again.
Want you go first? Okay, John Steiner, Polk County. I skimmed it, trying to prepare more for what was going to be presented today instead of the comments. But when I did review it, a lot of the questions I'd be really lost on how to answer some of them because it tries to put everything in a box. Recycle facility, compost facility, a transfer station. A lot of those things are a mixed use facility and it doesn't lend itself to answer a lot of those questions as a mixed use facility, but I have to try and break it out. You want the building square footage, the total building square footage, or do you want the part dedicated to recycling or to composting or whatever it is? To me, I almost would have to fill out that same survey for each different use. But I also understand this is a really crazy lift. You have to have something to start with. I'm just afraid whatever I supply might just be taken at its face and not a lot of in-depth to explain it out. But even a follow-up, I'd have to prepare for quite a while to be able to answer all those questions, even that follow-up. So I don't know if there's a better way of doing it, but I don't really care for for what's there, but that might be the best we can do.
Miriam?
I was just gonna continue on the reuse conversation that I think there needs to be a question in here for cities and counties about who participates in the packaging reuse economy in their area. And then there needs to be a whole separate questionnaire for people who are part of, and I would call it the reuse economy because there's a lot of businesses that's not what they do. Like, for example, dairy, right? Where they're selling milk, but they're doing it in a reusable bottle. And so like, how are we going to capture that kind of information, or a grocery store that has reusable deli containers? So I think that they're just, and I don't know if those people will have a separate, like, I don't know that they would even do a survey, but they should be surveyed somehow, right? Like they should be tracked and assessed and listed and incorporated in some form.
It just reminded me of my popcorn bin that I buy to reuse at the theater. Sarah, it looks like, and then we'll move on. And then we'll come back to this. Yes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Sarah Bixby, NWRA. And we're very glad that our letter was well received. You know, we want the program to succeed, and we're very sincere in our offer to meet and work through, you know, ways to respond that are going to provide useful data that meet the long-term objectives. So without an overreach in that way, and that also protect our confidential business data. So we're very interested in the conversations and discussions today. And I know that there are some NWRA members that hope to speak later as well to some of the specific concerns and points that we've already identified. So again, thank you, and we appreciate this conversation.
Okay, we will move on then on the agenda. Next up is the updates from CAA, and then also the CAA's perspective of the needs assessment. We will combine those two.
Great, this is Chris Cooperian with CAA. So I've had no new registrations as far as I'm aware at this point. And then we're gonna have Pete Hargrave give kind of an overview of the needs assessment, what would help us for stewardship planning.
And who's,
Sorry, he's on screen.
okay.
Perfect. Thanks, Chris.
There we go.
Sorry, Peter Hargrave, CA. Yeah, so I was just, I think our thinking was we kind of walk you through just quickly today, why is the needs assessment so important to the pro? What are some of the lessons that we've learned in other jurisdictions as these needs assessments have been developed? And then we just thought it would be helpful to maybe provide a little bit of an insight into how we're thinking through some of the elements of the needs assessment, what information we're looking for, because at the end of the day, we need to, you know, to some degree use the information that's being collected to help us with planning and budgeting moving forward. I think I talked about this in a previous meeting. I think we have talked about this. The needs assessment really does become a key input for the pro. It helps us to figure out how we are going to design the stewardship plan, ensures we can meet the legislation and the requirements in the legislation. All of those details help us to figure out how we're going to implement. So understanding where there might be infrastructure gaps, understanding what we're leveraging, what is the base system that we're leveraging off in order to meet the requirements moving forward. We also need to understand from a budgeting perspective. So it's really important. We need to make sure that all of the data is there for us to make sure that we can plan moving forward. Otherwise, there's additional work we need to do after the fact. I will say we have also found this needs assessment process to be quite helpful for us even before the program plan development actually happens, is it provides a bit of a starting point to start having conversations with stakeholders that allows us to start thinking through how are we going to establish the system What are some of the considerations we may want to take into place, and how is each state somewhat different, and how do we figure out at least some of the initial thinking that's going to go into that stewardship plan? I've just provided this slide as just a bit of an understanding from our perspective. Obviously, we have the needs assessment that's going to run through 2026, but we know that we have to start some of the planning and work ahead of time to start thinking through the program plan. We need time to make sure that we've got lots of time to get out to stakeholders or interest holders in order to get feedback as we develop that plan. So we need to start a bunch of that planning ahead of time. Obviously, we want to make sure that we're using that needs assessment properly, but again, there is some of that planning work that we're doing well in advance of the needs assessment being completed. Just speaking very broadly, and I'll speak to some of these specific issues in the next couple of slides, but I think broadly, we really do continue to learn from needs assessment work that we're doing in each of the states. So some of the key lessons we've learned to date, there will always be data limitations. We've talked about, I think, some of them today, which is if you hand somebody 500 questions, they may not answer any of them because it just may be too daunting for them to answer all those questions. We know that there are going to be things where there is insufficient data. We're not measuring exactly what we're looking for. There's issues with uniformity and disclosure. So those problems will always exist in every one of the states. There is a need and ability for the pro to be able to access the data from the needs assessment, to understand the methodology, because there will always be issues that may be identified afterwards or changes that may be made where, let's say, a material is exempted. We need to understand how the data was put together in the first place if we need to make adjustments moving forward. And then again, there's really benefits to the early collaboration as part of the needs assessment process. I've just included here a bit of some of the issues we deal with when it comes to data limitations. So waste management data comes with lots of warts. It is always to some degree a challenge. You run into issues where there's insufficient data, where entities may not be collecting data. For example, it's unlikely that many are collecting data around how much compostable packaging material or certified compostable packaging material is moving through compost facilities at this time. It's just not a reason to necessarily measure that. Smaller operators may not have necessarily the same ability to collect and track data. And again, there are systems potentially outside the residential side that don't necessarily have the same type of measurement functions attached to them. We also get issues of uniformity. A good example is waste composition studies are often done differently. There's different methodologies that are attached to them. There are different material categories that municipalities ask for, and that creates a bit of an issue when you're trying to compare like data. We also get issues around disclosure, and I think Sarah brought up earlier some of the concerns that are there from private waste providers, and there are legitimate reasons and rationale why they are concerned about potentially sharing data that exposes what they would consider to be commercial confidential. So we know we are going to deal with some of those issues as we move forward. I think with all of this, we understand that there's a need then to make sure as the needs assessment moves forward that you know that those gaps are going to exist to some extent. None of this prevents the work from happening, but there needs to be an understanding that you might need multiple approaches to make sure that you can validate the results that you're getting at the end of the day. And so that's been a process that we've tried to use in other jurisdictions to try to make sure that we're triangulating some of the findings that we built through some of the needs assessments. We are seeing in a number of states where we run into issues around access to the data and understanding of the methodology. In a number of the jurisdictions we've operated in, we haven't had access. The states run the needs assessment process, and we haven't had access to the data. And that prevents us. So if we are looking at budgeting and we need to really get into the numbers to understand what the regional costs are from a budgeting perspective, this creates a lot of challenges for us. It also creates challenges, again, where there might have been an assumption that was made during the needs assessment or a change that might happen to the legislation, an additional exemption that's made, and that creates challenges for the pro then as they're writing the program plan to figure out how to make adjustments to the planning and budgeting side. So we are trying to, as much as possible, find ways to make sure that we still have access and we have an understanding of the methodology and the data that's being used. So scope and collaboration, this last piece I think really fits to, we've had a number of circumstances where the legislation sets the parameters for the needs assessment, but has forgotten to lay out aspects within the needs assessment. So it meant that we had to actually go back and do additional work in order to make sure that we had the data necessary to complete the program plan. So again, I think the process where there is engagement back and forth, and we have some ability to talk to the advisory board like we are today, is really helpful for us to make sure that there's understanding that's being developed as we move to the program plan, as well as making sure that we're identifying potential areas where there may be gaps in knowledge that may be needed for the program plan. I'm going to focus really quickly just on, some of the areas where I think, as we start to think through what's required and how the needs assessment is going to approach it becomes potentially significantly important. So there are targets, performance targets that are set out that the pro is required to meet. So the requirements state that the needs assessment needs to propose performance targets, not limited to unit-based, weight-based, and volume-based for waste reduction, reuse, and return, recycling rates, composting rates, post-consumer recycled content. So all of those things mean potentially that we really need to think through what are all the data points that the pro needs to gather as it looks to measure those targets. And as you can imagine, the pro usually captures data just simply based on weight of materials. If we have the addition of unit-based targets, volume-based targets, that will require the pro to capture very separate information. And that's things that we're going to need early on to understand what those requirements need to be, what advice and guidance we may need to provide to producers to ensure they can meet those reporting requirements. I will mention just one additional thing. There is this requirement that after January 1st, 2032, you can't sell covered materials into the state, and then it has a number of parameters. But the one that struck us is reusable and capable of being managed through a reuse system requires them to meet the reuse rate and return rate that's set out in the program plan, and which would be informed by the needs assessment. This means it's really important for us to get that rate, those two rates set appropriately. And if they're set too high, there could be potential consequences that come with that. And so as we start to think about sort of these rates, we start to ask ourselves lots of questions as we start to move into this. So if I take a few examples, if I take compost, there is a question of where in the measurement, where does the pro measure manage through composting? So is the measurement point for composting after the material is being processed? Is it when the material is set into the processing system? There's just not a clarity of where that's measured. That will be important for us to understand in the needs assessment as to where that measurement point is. so that however Eunomia may measure that, we're measuring that in the same way. There's certainly a need for are we measuring every type of compostable material separately? So there are different composting rates for uh, paper versus compostable plastic, rigid, compostable plastic, flexible. Are they all the same target? And if we're going to measure them differently, how do we make sure that we're capturing that information as part of the needs assessment? Are all uncoated paper and wood considered compostable? And that will be important for us because we need to make sure that we're measuring them, that people report them in the same way to us. And then we need to figure out how do we set the denominator. So if you have a composting rate, you have what's captured and processed or managed through composting, and then you need the denominator. And so there is this question for us, particularly around uncoated paper, of is that uncoated paper in the recycling side or is it in the composting side or is it on both sides? And so there's certainly concerns or questions we have on that side. And as Eunomia looks to do the needs assessment, how much of the material that might run through a composting material is exempt material versus how much is actually covered material. I'll just move. We've had a lot of conversations about reuse and reuse and refill. We do, as we look at the reuse rate and the return rate, we do have a number of questions as we think about how are those measured. So we need clarity as to what we're measuring. So what is the difference between that reusable product that's on the shelf? So, you know, again, a travel mug that you might purchase versus a reusable package. How do you measure if some reusable packaging are not collected by the producer or service provider? So you might have a bag that you purchase from a retail store and then use that bag over and over again. There's not necessarily a way to capture those activities. How might reusable packaging vary for non-residential covered entities? So as you start to get into the difference between, let's say, a cup that might be reused at a stadium versus a pallet or a drum, and how does that impact potentially the guidance we may provide? And then, you know, how do we make sure we think through the return rates for various types of reuse systems? And I talk about sort of a closed versus an open. So that stadium where the cups never leave versus potentially a brewery where I might get a growler and I might take that home and then refill that at a later point. So these are some of the things I think we're thinking about as we try to look towards the information that the needs assessment is going to gather and assess and bring forward. And I'll stop there. I see Sydney's got her hand up, so happy
Yes.
to.
Sydney, you have a question or a comment?
I do. Thank you so much. And Peter, I'll just say, actually, could you leave? Actually, you don't have to leave this slide up. That's okay. But okay, I'm supposed to introduce myself every time I talk. I keep forgetting. This is Sydney Harris with Upstream. I'm first of all glad to see you're thinking about reuse so much. I wanted to do a quick, for lack of a better term, fact check on the point you made about the 2032 restrictions on like what can be introduced into the market. I don't believe that reusable and capable of being managed through a reuse system has to meet the reuse rate and return rate, but I could be wrong. So I was wondering if you could point to where that is in the statute, because that was not my understanding.
Yeah, it's C sub 1. I don't think we had really noticed it the first time that we looked, but it says reusable and capable of being managed through a reuse system that meets the reuse rate and return rate required under, you know, the specific section. So that's the reference specifically to it. And I think, you know, as we were looking it through it, we're like, well, that becomes super important then to make sure that the reuse and return rates are set appropriately. And again, that example of, I'm assuming that in a closed environment, the return rate is probably really, really high, whereas you know, out in the environment like a growler, it may never be returned. Somebody might still use that at home, but they may never actually return it. So, I think we're trying to think through some of those elements because we don't want a perverse outcome set by how all of this comes together.
Yes, absolutely. So on the growler thing, I'm glad you mentioned that because that would actually not be reusable. That would be refillable and therefore not subject to the reuse and return rate. This is why I'm really excited that we're going to do in, I think, maybe March or April, like a whole discussion with the advisory board on how to measure these things and how to define them. So to ease some of your concerns, like things that don't get returned into the system, meaning to a third party or to a producer, those are refill and they would count if you can measure them toward the source reduction or waste reduction rate, but not need to count toward the reuse rate. So we do need to be distinguishing between reusable and refillable. I would say returnable and refillable, but the statute says reusable and refillable.
Yeah, I think Sydney, so that like a milk bottle, if I got a milk bottle at my curb and I returned it, I think it's the same type of thing that we're trying to work our heads through as to how to set that. And again, not wanting to potentially disrupt activities that may actually be working.
Yeah, totally. The milk bottle would be returnable, reusable, and that would count toward that target. The growler would not. If the consumer keeps it, like a bag or a growler, that's refill. That's a different thing. If it goes back to a producer or someone else, that's reuse and it's getting returned and cleaned, and that would have to count toward the target. So again, I'm not saying these are very important to know and to measure, and we're going to talk all about that, but just to add some factoids to the presentation.
Thank you. That's very helpful. I hadn't thought about the difference. I mean, I know there's a difference between reuse and refillable, but it's going to be important as we are looking at the rates. All of these different nuances are going to be important as we pull them together. Are there any other questions for Peter? Let's see, Sarah.
Thank you. Sarah Bixby, NWRA. Thank you, Peter, for your presentation. One of the things that you said early on is that CAA should have access to all of the data. And I noted as I was reviewing the draft survey that MPCA is proposing to put a lot of the confidential business information into a data warehouse and have a staff member, a trained staff member, be the only one who can access it. And so we had a question about, well, how does the consultant get access to it? And now you're proposing that CAA has access to it. How do you anticipate maintaining confidentiality of our data if we have all of these groups that presumably need to access it and use the data?
Thanks, Sarah. Peter Hargreave, CAA. It's a legitimate question. I think our concern is the needs assessment may be completed. We may move into the program plan development side, and we may hear things that say, these numbers that you're using from the needs assessment are fundamentally not right. So there is inevitably people that are going to come out of the woodwork that haven't been involved in the process that may identify issues after the fact. If we don't have that data, we can't, we need the ability to be able to adjust numbers. We need to figure out how to budget accordingly. So if elements change and we don't have access to the initial data, then we can't remodel any of the information. We can't adjust our costs unless we completely go back out to the marketplace again. So that's the concern from our perspective as to how that's achieved. Sorry.
Peter, I think one of the things that we need to make sure we clarify here is it is non-public data. It doesn't mean that data isn't aggregated so that it can be used in the analysis. Is that the best way to put it? So you're not going to get access to non-public data. No one other than through the PCA and the way they warehouse information. There will be data that will be pulled and aggregated. so that it cannot be identified with any particular respondent. And that is the reason that you do it that way. You still are asking for the data. If you couldn't use it for anything, you wouldn't even, you just say, you know, you don't have to supply it. The idea is that you pull it out so that it cannot be identified to a specific industry or a specific respondent. Okay, are there any questions on that? And Kirk, if I'm wrong, please tell me.
No, and I think Kirk it up from MPCA, we work with our data folks here too. If there are questions on the data, we could maybe look at it and run it a different way. Again, just like you said, Chair, we can see the specifics and report out aggregates. And there may be times we may not, because the data set is so small, you can identify the individual. And that's, data is very important to us. That's why we've hired someone dedicated solely to that and Quinn, and to be able to help do that. So I think we're interested to how to work with the various groups to be able to make that balance, to do it. And I think there will have to be conversations as we go through, and there are specific pieces, but there will not be unlimited access for certain types of data.
And I know that the state and counties and everyone that deals with non-public data is very serious about making sure that that data is not public in any way. Okay, I hope that helps because we need data. It's just we can't have it identifiable. Oh, Peter, sorry. Go ahead, Peter.
Thank you, Peter Hargreaves, CA. I totally appreciate that, and the pro is going to be responsible for managing significant amounts of data when the stewardship plan moves forward, because that data is going to need to be reported into us to allow us to provide reimbursements. I think the concern is the data becomes fundamental for planning purposes and budgeting purposes. And so this is where, you know, in other jurisdictions, we've either run the needs assessment or we've had to run a separate process in order to get the data needed to be able to appropriately plan and set budgets. And we have very strict conditions in place in order to make sure that we provide protection for that data. We are managing significant amounts of very commercial confidential information, particularly when it comes to you know, producers and their supply data that's coming in through us. So we do have systems and policies in place to manage all of that side of things.
Well, and CAA is going to simply have to work with the state because, as I said, it's taken very seriously that no non-public data is provided, whether it's to CAA or anyone else. And so I'm confident because, again, I've worked in this area, that you can provide what you need to do your budgets, to do your timeline, to do your analysis. But the non-public, and that's not a huge portion of what is going to be coming in. The non-public data is about making sure that a business can operate and not have issues with competitors. That's about the simplest way I can put it. But so the data will be available, but it will not, you will not get the non-public data by entity responding. It will be aggregated. Okay. All right. Anything more for CAA?
No, nothing for more additional.
Okay. All right. Oh, Matt.
Hi, everyone. Max Sellers from Our World. Peter, just a quick question on the reuse and return rates. Are you mentioning that that would be calculated by weight or just by number of items?
It's an interesting question, Mac. And there may be some differences potentially between different activities that may be happening in the marketplace. I think this is where this is sort of a little bit of a newer area for CA. It's a new sort of requirement. There is some work that's been undertaken in California in this area, but I think we're certainly looking for feedback as part of this needs assessment as the best way to measure.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay, I don't see any further hands here or on the screen, so we will move on then to the needs assessment overview with Eunomia.
Hi, thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, Sarah Edwards from Eunomia. So I've got a fair few slides to go through. I'm hoping that some of you would have had a chance to look at this before the meeting. I'm really kind of pleased with some of the discussion we've had already today. I mean, some of the points I think that CAA have made around data being super important, some of the information, the comments on the granularity of the survey and what could be provided and can't be provided, I think feeds into that discussion as well. And some of the discussions that Peter also mentioned around, you know, what is in the denominator, how are we going to set some of these rates, how do we measure some of these things, are still points that we need to discuss with MPCA and the wider board, so that we can make sure that that flows through into the needs assessment. So quickly, I'm just going to touch on, I think, objectives and overviews. I think everyone knows roughly where we are, but I'm going to focus a little bit on matching some of the primary research that we'll be carrying out with the objectives in the statute, talking a little bit around the kind of needs assessment plan now out. We obviously are under quite short timescales in terms of capturing some of that primary data, supplementing it with secondary data and doing the analysis, working with you all and obviously CAA to make sure that the complexities of some of the things we're doing is clear and transparent, and then obviously taking some questions. I think if you do have questions as we go through, very happy to take them. I'm hoping I'm going to be able to stick to the 30 minutes, but I'm not too sure. So obviously a number of objectives that we have throughout this piece of work was, first of all, to conduct the research analysis to produce the primary assessment. I think we all know that, you know, us as Eunomia wanted to do far more primary research as part of that. That has now been pushed back into the, you know, the full needs assessment. So as we move into the needs assessment, we really have developed a plan to execute collection of primary data needed to fill those secondary data points. So that we have a really good revised framework or revised framework foundation for currently what's happening in the state. We can then look at what might be possible with additional investment services in areas that don't currently receive services to start setting some of those recycling, composting and reuse rates. And so really the objectives going out there is to carry out that. Once we've done that additional research, to kind of do the analysis to produce the needs assessment. So over the next few slides, we've kind of just outlined, and I think hopefully most of you will kind of know what's required in the legislative text, but just some of the components of the legislative text and some of the outreach or engagement that we're going to be doing. On top of this, there will be, this is mostly the primary outreach and engagement. On top of this, there will be additional research on programs that are already happening. So for instance, under reuse and refill, you know, we will be digging into some of the, speaking to not only service providers in the US, but looking overseas and further afield in terms of how programs are rolled out there and kind of return rates, collection rates that they're receiving there in programs, for instance, in France and Germany when it comes to beverage. So as part of the first thing we obviously have to do is like evaluate the existing waste reduction, reuse and recycling composting schemes and assess the overall recycling rate. To some extent, we did an initial piece of work on this in the preliminary needs assessment. We didn't really touch on recycled content there. So as part of the kind of outreach to gather additional information, we've obviously got the surveys, which we're going to have another discussion on later. Just in respect to the surveys, working with MPCA, what we tried to do in some of those surveys was not ask questions specifically from the cities and the counties that are already submitted for existing reporting measures, but to supplement what's already existed by other questions, so that we weren't asking for data that those entities already report into the state. So maybe we can talk a little bit around that, whether that's sufficient or not. But that's the approach that we took specifically for counties, for instance, that are already reporting. It was noted, I think, as part of the preliminary assessment that we had very little information on other covered entities. So a lot of the work we'll be doing in terms of some of the primary research will also be engaging with schools and other entities to get a better understanding of currently the amount of material, covered materials that's generated in those other covered entities, and also the programs that are in place to collect material from those. Obviously, schools are an important component of that. They also have the ability potentially to have reuse and reuse reuse programs going forward. So there'll be a key area, and we'll be talking to some of the different departments within the state to try and initially get some access. And what we always find with primary research is you may make one contact, and then through that contact you get other contacts that you can follow up with. So, you know, specifically on reuse, and I know it's been noted that there are programs happening on the ground now. You know, one of the key entities that we will talk to is Reuse Minnesota. We've actually worked with them before, so have a good relationship. So we're hoping that some of those early conversations can also point us into the direction of additional information. And I think we've got a whole host of different advisory board meetings that will help dig into some of the topics that will enable us to do this evaluation, which is how do you measure recycling? Some of the points that Peter made in terms of what is the point of measurement for recycling. Sometimes, you know, people discuss point of collection being at the point it is collected, you know, at the back end of the MRF, or when it's actually delivered to a recycling facility, an end market. So all of those things we'll be discussing with the board, and also very much talking to industry associations, specifically on one of the last points, which is post-consumer recycled content. We need to understand, obviously, the extent to which post-consumer recycled content is being used now, but also kind of some of the possibilities into the future. So the extent, like the technical feasibility of incorporated recycled content into more products, and the type of products that can be incorporated in, depending on the source of that material. And then we're obviously looking at evaluation.
I have a question, and I'm going to try not to. This is Victoria. I'm hoping we don't have too many interruptions, but I want to make sure. I noticed that refill is listed under the relevant engagement tasks. Is the legislation, does that mention refill, or do they consider reuse and refill in the same context? You know, anybody? I just want to make sure we don't use, because reuse under the legislative text could be refilling. That's a reuse. And I just want to make sure that that doesn't get lost in this. So
Can I answer that question? Is that
Sydney,
right?
is that you?
Here. Yeah, that's me.
Okay.
Just a quick clarifying answer there. So the legislation does separately define reuse and refill rates. And even though we would typically instinctively think refill is a type of reuse, those are the words that the statute uses. So when you hear reuse in this context, think returnable reusables that go back into a system, like a milk bottle that we were talking about earlier, but refill is separately defined, and then it is explicitly nested under the waste reduction umbrella in terms of where it counts toward target. So things like refillable soap dispensers that I refill at home, or like a jar I take to the co-op, or anything that I keep as a consumer as refill, that would go under refill, and it would count toward waste reduction. And then reuse is separately defined as those things that we return into the system.
Okay. And that's actually what I was trying to figure out here, because I want to make sure that when we talk about the evaluation of, there is evaluation of refillable nested under waste reduction, it sounds like. And I think that should be stated there explicitly, because I didn't know it. And I don't know,
and to be fair, refill is really hard to measure. Like refill is much harder to measure than reuse as the statute defines it. So just managing expectations for everyone.
I'm just talking for Eunomia to make sure that they have existing waste reduction. And if you want to put somehow refill has to be included in the legislative text, because it's included in the legislative text.
Yeah, I mean, I think there is a definition for waste reduction, and I think the definition for waste reduction includes something on source reduction, which includes something on refill. I can't quite remember, because there's lots of different paths you have to follow to be explicit in terms of what's included. But yeah, I think there is that link through the statute where you can link the refill to the waste overarching waste reduction. But this is the precise kind of text within the needs assessment component of the statute. I
just wanted to make sure that it wasn't lost in this, and so I appreciate the tutorial for myself.
No, I think we're all going to have constant tutorials. So I think we have to look at the evaluation of the covered materials that are disposed, so digging a bit deeper into kind of the composition of that material. some of that will come through the waste composition analysis that's being done at landfill sites at the moment. Obviously, that only gives you a partial view of the story. We will be then gathering some additional data through materials that are collected at the curb, through information at facilities, that's in terms of incoming material, and also composting facilities as well. I mean, as you can see, there is, and we have discussed it, there's a big emphasis on some of the primary research with using those surveys. And we had a meeting today with Sarah from NWRA. I think we do need to balance the ability to ask some quite specific data with the realization that people might not want to submit that much data. And in the past, we have taken a view where we potentially ask some more higher level questions, and then we interview a select number of stakeholders to dig deeper into some of the actual data that, more specific data that we need. And that perhaps we also ask some kind of theoretical questions so that we can get some information around costs and things that we can then use to build the system up. And talking to Peter's point, like generally when we do an analysis and looking into the future state, we will do in areas, for instance, that don't have a service. We will do a bottom-up assessment of what it might cost to deliver services to those areas, thinking about the cost of vehicles, labour, the number of households that could be passed on a route in a urban versus rural community. So we do bottom-up analysis, which is why sometimes we're asking for some data that people might think is quite sensitive, but we will work with NWRI and others to make sure that we can try and access that data in a sensitive way. I think this touches very much on Peter's point. We have to propose a range of outcomes for covered materials, and this is something we have a meeting with MPCA on today, and we will hopefully be engaging with you all in a number of different meetings as well as CAA, but we have to try and define what those range of outcomes might be, how aggressive the state might want to be in terms of its targets around waste reduction, reuse and return rates. We have to think very much as part of this in terms of what is the covered material, but also the covered entities through which that material will flow. And therefore, talking very much to Peter's point around what is denominator for some of these rate calculations, and then making sure we're very clear on what data and information goes into that denominator so that we can then calculate return rates, waste reduction rates that the pro can then build into their program plan. But this is quite complex, and the wording within the statute in Minnesota is different to everywhere else. So this is a key area that we will want to be talking to you all and MPCA on. The same goes to kind of the range of outcomes for categories under these other areas as well, which is kind of bringing in other areas of your statutes to make sure that we're meeting some of the other goals.
I have a question, John.
Yeah.
John Steiner, Polk County. I really don't know if this comment fits here or where it really fits. The whole thing with refillable versus reusable, a lot of us use the term reusable in lieu of, or as an alternative to refillable. We don't see the difference. Don't think about when to reference it. I don't think reports necessarily break that out. I don't think they do. It's very nuanced, and we might not have that data. I don't know how we would get that data in a lot of cases, but that's not the only thing we have. There's a conversation earlier about recycling of paper versus compost. A lot of that isn't determined by the generator. It's determined by what happens with the material or what it was used for. So paper may be recyclable if it gets wet or soiled. It may be compostable, or depending on what's soiled with, it may belong in the garbage because neither market can accept it. I don't know how you set goals on that when you really can't control what happened to that material. It's kind of determined based on after it goes through the system. We'll get stuff that's put in the recycle bin. Someone leaves the lid open on the recycle bin, it's full of water, and all the papers that was collected for recycling is no longer recycled. Another example would be beneficial reuse. There's a lot of things that get reused, or recycled, reused, but they don't go back to, a glass bottle. It doesn't go back to a glass bottle again. It gets used in road construction, or it gets used as sandblast media or something else. Is that can be counted, or is that can be kicked out? So where the state has all these clear lines and then doesn't address certain things in the statute, we may have to figure out how to deal with that just based on how our system is set.
Which kind of brings us full circle to the survey and how it's together.
I think it's, I'm sorry, Megan, John, maybe I think it's the perfect time to bring this up, John, especially as we're hearing from Sarah about denominators in Peter too. I think that there's the potential for some unintended consequences here, and I don't want to set the system up to fail because the denominator isn't counting right. So
I just didn't know if she was done. That's
No,
why I
she's done.
didn't, if I should bring it up right now.
Kate also.
Kate.
Kate Davenport from the Recycling Partnership. This is actually a clarifying question to Kirk. Going off of your question, I mean, outside of EPR, the state already defines what does and doesn't count as recycling, and I assume that holds here in terms of some of the numerator calculations. So like the state is very clear that alternative daily cover does not count as recycling for glass, for example. So can you clarify, does the EPR law open up opportunity to supersede where the state has already defined that or not?
You know, this is Kirk from MPCA. That's part of the conversation we're having. I think some of them are clear, but as was mentioned, something we call different things, beneficial reuse. How does that fit into our definitions? Is that recycling? Is it reuse? I think we're going to have some translations there. There is a little bit difference on how we figure the recycling rate, for instance, and where it's measured. We've been having these internal conversations to bring actually to this group a graphic to help be able to do that in upcoming meetings. So there is going to be some shift on how we talk about things as a result of this law, because it is changing from our law. But some of the things, is it recycling or not? You know, I don't think that'll have as much of a play. So it's not a black and white answer for you there, but this is going to change how we talk about the systems in Minnesota, even so much that we've started to steal some words here, other reports we're using, like alternative collection systems. You know, those type of words where you'll start seeing in our reports as we start to transition some of those.
Okay, it is now 2:12. We are supposed to be taking a break right now. I want to, and clearly we will not be able to get through this whole thing before we take a break. So I'm going to suggest that we take a break now, but I want to throw out an idea so that we can help inform the rest of this discussion, which also leads into the survey. And that is, I spoke very briefly with Miriam about the fact that since we have representatives of all the partners that are going to be answering the survey on our board, that it might be, I believe that it would be a good idea to set up one of the ad hoc subcommittees to work on this, to really go through it, because I don't think that the way it is currently set up, I don't even know how to respond to it, to be honest with you, for tomorrow, because I just don't think it's workable the way it's written. But the ideas of what we're trying to do, I mean, one example, and I'll just, I was thinking about, just as an example, and then we will take a break here. Ramsey and Washington counties have a partnership in the Recycling and Energy Center. We have our own recycling programs. Some of them are municipal, some of them are not. We have composting, we have organics that are going to be put into the waste stream that are pulled out and going to a composting now, and then I forgot what it's called. Digester. Thank you. I've only been talking about it for years and then I lose it. We have transfer stations that are privately run. We contract with the haulers to pull out the organics. We have end markets that we work with at the counties, and we do that some in partnership and some individually. I don't know how they could possibly take the survey that is here and get that information. And I think, John, your example was very clear. I think that all of the data that they're asking for needs to be there so that people can answer it in a realistic way that will provide them with the baseline that they need. So I am going to propose, and we'll come back and we can talk more about it, but that there be a subcommittee. I know that the timeline would probably be pretty short, but you know me, or would have to be involved in that because we are the folks on the ground that are going to have to answer these questions, our industries or our areas. And John, in your case, you're going to have to do it.
Yeah.
But I think that that is going to be critical for us to get this right from the beginning, because the data is the base. We talked about that in the preliminary needs assessment. The data is the base. If there's something wrong there, the rest of this doesn't work. All right, so we'll take a 10-minute break.
Sarah, how much longer do you think you need for your presentation?
Oh, you're there. I mean, I've hardly started. So
okay. You are, the
I'm
room is on,
kind
Sarah.
huh?
The whole room can hear you. Just to say, if you want to call me, we could do that too. But if you want to, it looks like we've got Kirk, Molly, all those folks can hear you.
I don't, there's just a lot to get through, and I'm not sure if people want to hear all that, or I was thinking, I mean, I think maybe I can just jump to the proposed engagement timeline and then maybe just talk a little bit more around the needs assessment process.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know if Kirk can catch Victoria or Miriam or someone and check in with them.
Yeah.
But yeah, my impression is that you're maybe 5 minutes in to a 30-minute presentation. So
I know, and there is a need to focus on the discussion on the survey.
So I sent one along, so we can and allow the conversation. Also, I think what's right was having to worry about is their set ideas.
see.
To focus on, oh, sorry, Sarah. The things to focus on is the timeline and the overview on the needs assessment. Is that it?
I think there's a lot of detail in here that would be good to go through, but I don't think there's sufficient time. If there also wants to be a discussion on the surveys and the next steps on the surveys, because that's imperative that we get some agreement on that, because we need to start moving.
Be curious. I was just talking with Lucy about it. She pointed out that there's experts on surveys to avoid you know how it goes. So I just like if we do. You know, sometimes
She left. Yeah, get that thing back. Future of a city, so I have a city, just type about the same thing.
oh, yeah.
So that. So here, and so there's two, just to get a wider, allowed station. And so I think we still have to.
So maybe move the deadline or something.
Well, I think we're gonna actually like. Just trying to shrink this so you can have the conversation with everybody.
Okay, so when we, I see that.
Yeah, and, or we could just turn to Sarah and say, you know, it sounds like there's some ideas on how to condense this. Just want to run by the board, here are the things we want to cover. Are there other things you'd like us to cover? Otherwise, we'll just leave folks to read the document and provide feedback.
Okay, so as far as the, okay, I'm confused. The survey or on their presentation?
On the presentation. Okay, well, if we went through the presentation, we made up all the time, there would be a conversation.
Okay.
So I think we're trying to bring it up a level and focus on schedule and overall framework of the needs assessment.
Okay.
Excuse me, but Sarah can say for sure. And then, but we want to know if there's something that folks looked at stuff beforehand that they really want to talk about, we'll make sure we cover it.
No, I know. I'm used to it.
Butter in the hall, so she didn't have a chance.
Okay, that's good to know. They don't want to. Okay.
We're not muted. You were.
Okay.
Oh.
Right.
Well, I think it should.
Or there was that,
We do.
we jumped over.
No, let's just think she must. Okay, I'm gonna call the advisory board back to order.
Yes.
And so, for Sarah, what I'd like to do is, we need to, as you can tell, we're having a lot of discussion, and I believe that there's some things within the rest of your presentation that you really want to highlight, or there may be, but otherwise we can move forward because we're not going to have time to go through the entire presentation. So are there certain parts of the presentation that you want to make sure you cover?
Well, I want to make sure that everyone's able to review it and comment back or provide any feedback at another time. I think I can go through a little bit more of the time scales that we're working on and a little bit around the process for the needs assessment plan. But I think there's a lot of questions there and components that we will be talking to MPCA about, and we'll be coming back to the board with specific discussions on. So I think if the best use of time is to discuss the surveys, because that is the critical path element for us. If we do not get those surveys out, at least the county surveys this month, you know, it's going to have a significant impact on the ability to deliver the project and work within the timescales we have, and to allow people sufficient time, you know, to respond to that as well. So yeah.
Okay. Well, by this month, you mean the end of January?
Oh, we do, yes. We have a slightly, is everyone back? And I can just show you the program, okay. Maybe.
You know what? Okay. I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done on this survey. In chatting briefly with Kirk, I know that we're talking, and one of the things that the letter talked about was having subgroups that would meet and discuss the survey and how it could be simplified and getting more information, quite frankly. Because I personally, I don't think it's workable the way it's written. I don't think you'll get the information that you need. And there's going to be some things that are going to be answered in a different way, not knowing how to answer it, because everything is pretty tightly put together as far as it has to be. As I said in the hall, I said, you know, a question could be, if you do recycling, do you do 1, 2, and 3? And the answer is yes or no. And when you come to me and I go, well, wait a minute, I do 1 and 2, but I don't do 3. So how do I answer this? And so I think that there's a way that the survey can be put together that will make it a lot easier. I did mention that I would have a subcommittee, but it was pointed out to me that a subcommittee, first of all, there's not enough time, but that we need to get, I would like that a subcommittee is probably not the best way to do it if we can get the PCA, and I believe we can, to have some of these workshops or get-togethers, because they can be pulled together pretty quickly to go over the survey and figure out what actually needs to be there and how people will be able to utilize them. I would ask that, and I'll turn it over to Kirk in a moment here to say exactly how we could do that. I don't know that it can be done before the end of January or by January or maybe mid-February, depending on how quickly you can pull groups together. But what I would like to have is, instead of the subcommittee, so that we wouldn't have two separate groups trying to figure this out, that I would ask that members of the advisory board attend the meetings or the workshops. I assume mostly they'll be virtual, but something so that you could provide the input that way and it goes directly. Because again, this advisory board is made up of all of the different facets of extended producer responsibility in Minnesota and the data that's needed there. So if I hopefully can get that commitment, John, I'm looking at you. But I honestly, I want to have the input from others as well. And want it to be clearly constructive input to say, hey, you want to get this data? This is the best way to ask for it. And who to ask for it, because you're going to have all kinds of partnerships out there that aren't going to be, okay, this is just county. This is just marketing. This is just whatever. And that's the way it's set up right now. And so I hope I'm making some sense here, because I walked in here feeling very concerned and frustrated because I wanted to make sure that we got the right thing, but I didn't know exactly how to do it. So the idea is then that Kirk, and I will turn it over to you now, how do you propose to put this together so that we can get the input from the advisory board and people that are not on the advisory board, but that are included in all of the aspects of the different surveys? So it's not just one, it's all of them, and having those discussions. Kirk.
Thank you, Chair. Kirk from MPCA. I'm just going to say we're building as we go this conversation right now. So I'm going to look to our folks here too to chime in and get feedback others. But just from the conversation that we've had earlier today, and then also some other conversations that folks have done, what we're thinking of right now is next week setting up that we have workshops for each of the 5. So we'd like to know which members here of the advisory board would be interested in being in which ones. And we've also made a commitment publicly that we would include other people not on the advisory board or a little smaller, but they're going to have to be small groups. They're going to have to come together quickly. This is going to throw off the schedule Sarah mentioned a little bit, but the goal is next week to have those workshops, have some more in-depth conversations. I think part of the conversations was explaining why we've asked for things. I think one of the things we had gotten feedback is, why do you need information about commercial accounts? It's because covered entities, for instance, include commercial accounts, schools, nonprofits, those type of things. So I think it'll be a little bit of that. So right size, as you were talking about, Chair, what is needed and what's there. And I think CA mentioned it earlier, there isn't going to be perfect data. We all are going to have to work under the assumption there may be some gaps and things may not put together, but we will do the best available. So we're thinking of, for each of the surveys, having a work group. So that's 1 county, 1 municipalities, 1 haulers, 1 facilities, and 1 markets, and move that forward. We'd still like to have folks, if we put a deadline in, if you could supply information to us on that deadline, that will help us inform the workshops that we're going to form. So, more data into us, that's great. But I think part of this needs a conversation, from what I'm hearing from you, Chair, and others, about the survey and some little back and forth versus what we can do just in someone sending us some comments and we'll send something. So I'm gonna just real quick turn to our folks here for MPCA. And you know me, if I missed anything on that, but I think that's the kind of proposal we're throwing out there right now.
I think Colleen made a good point, but right now they are in Word document form, and we do intend for them to go into a SNAP survey. And so it is not intuitive in the way that it is laid out in its current form, and all of the options for answers haven't been built out in their entirety. So definitely a working document. Hopefully
Yeah, on top of that, I mean, there will be logic effectively within, it's very difficult to show you the survey because every time you answer a question, you'll be directed to another question that's related to the question you've just answered. So you may not see all the questions that are listed there. So it looks confusing, and we have tried to manage that confusion by putting some underarching text, but that obviously never works 100%. I think in terms of time, it would be good to discuss whether we could cover the county and municipality survey together in one meeting, whether we need 2 meetings or whether we can just do that in one. And just to echo, I suppose, Kurt's point, it would be really good if you could provide your detailed feedback before we go into those meetings so that we can have a real understanding. You know, we've obviously got good feedback from NWRA, and we had a meeting with them today on that and had some good suggestions around how we might be able to tackle some of the confidentiality points. So I think going into those meetings for us, it will be valuable to have your comments written and to have potential solutions as well. Because, you know, ourselves and MPCA have put quite a lot of time into this already, and we do need to get it out. And these are always the initial discussions. Like whenever we've done this before, there's always ability for us to have a callback, and I think we've included in that, would you like to be followed up for any information? There's always free form text spaces for people to put information for us to follow up. Specifically on the survey, you know, the hauler surveys, we've got surveys, we've got the ability, we're doing site visits, and we're going to have follow-up conversations to take people through it. So this isn't a done and dusted approach to gathering the information, but obviously we do want to make sure that you're happy with it within the timescales that we have to be able to gather the information.
Okay, so from the advisory board, any general comments, or that the deadline for that is tomorrow? And so to put in, I think it would be difficult to put in anything other than an overview of what we think needs to happen as individuals, because we don't have time to, we have to do it tomorrow. So, so each of us can look through it and say what our observations are and what we think needs to happen here. The issue of confidentiality, I think, is going to be dealt with efficiently with the system that's been set up and used for a number of years. And this is just another application of it, and it's consistent with state statute. So we'll be able to deal with that. And hopefully ahead of time before they do that. So so I would like to have then, I don't know if cities and counties you maybe could do them together. What do you think, John?
Well, just be clear, you're just looking for input on
the survey
questions.
Yeah.
On the survey. So you don't need a whole lot of participation, just people to participate. So I would think you'd probably combine them.
Okay.
Because you'll have some that'll be cities, you'll have some counties that'll be reporting just counties, you'll have some counties that'll be reporting for cities that the county or the cities reporting for the cities that the cities didn't organize. So you have a mix, so having them all together would make sense.
Okay, so that makes it 4 instead of 5, right? Yeah. Okay, so again, advisory board members, make sure that you provide the information to Mallory. I believe it's who we refer to. Okay, thank you. And then I think, Kurt, when you put together this information to, actually, if you could, any of the advisory board members, if you could tell Mallory or Kurt, Mallory, whether or not you would be willing to be a part of the small work groups, they're not gonna be huge, so we can't all be on everything. But to let Mallory know of your willingness to participate in one of those workshops. Again, I believe they would be online, correct? Kirk?
Kirk, can you provide a refresh of what those workshops are?
So what we would do is we'd pull together a small group of folks with MPCA and our consultants to talk through the surveys and get some feedback. And I think because we'll be getting some written beforehand, it will probably be more, how do we adjust to make it, that back and forth of, okay, we've gotten feedback, this question doesn't work. But we need state, the Nomia and us, we need this information. How do we reword it? That's where I think the workshop is really going to help, is kind of negotiation, but it's how do you build that together type thing based off of the feedback we're getting in. So it will be some advisory board members, but we have given this out to SWA, to the cities and NWRA members and that too. So we would be pulling in a couple other folks too. So it would be small enough that wouldn't have any open meeting issues, because it's only a couple folks that, from the advisory board that are representing their individual groups along with others.
Yeah.
And Kirk kind of answered this in a way. We just got this not too long ago. How many cities got this and how many have actually had time to read it and know they need to have it done within the next couple of days to participate in these meetings? That would be my concern.
They don't have to have this comments back to participate in one of these meetings.
Well, to give feedback though on the questions they want.
I believe in the workshop, that's what you're going to be pulling out, right? I mean, the purpose of them is not to just sit down and talk, it's to provide input.
Yeah, but I would think you'd have to read it to come to the meet, to realize it's important for you to come to the meeting to provide input. Otherwise, how would they know that they need to be even tracking this right now? It's not out in the public.
Okay, you're right. Your thoughts? How do we get people involved?
Yeah, so we're gonna, just a little bit of information, Kirk from MPCA, sorry. January 13th is when it went out, so folks have had it for a little bit of time, not a whole lot, but they haven't had it out there. I think what we're gonna have to do is, we have sent it out to some larger groups, and we may have to do some pinging of, say, SWA and others to say, hey, we're gonna have this work group, we need 2 or 3 of your members, fast timeline, looking at next week. Do the same with some other organizations we've done. To your point, John, not everyone's going to get the same piece. Well, there's this workshop. We might be able to send out some emails to do it that way, but I think we might have to work with some of the aggregate groups, I'll call them, like NWA or SWA, to have them help identify some people. So I think we might need to be able to do that, asking for some availability. That'll be on the agency to do
Okay,
that.
John and then Miriam.
Yeah, John Steiner, okay. You might need to actually ask certain callers or certain cities, and make sure to ask to get a mix to get them to participate, because I'm assuming the workshop's gonna be next week or 2. It's a pretty short turnaround. And right now, for every public entity is report season. So we're all doing our facility report. I mean, that's basically what we do for the first couple months of the year, is annual reports.
So putting out invitations rather than, and that way they can also say, we would like you to participate. And this is they get the material so that they can read through it.
I'm thinking you get on the phone and you ask certain ones.
Right, that's what I'm saying, an actual invitation.
Read this and get back. So.
Sound good?
But this is Miriam with Eureka Recycling. What do you guys have a sense of what percentage have come back, or have you gotten much feedback on this yet? I mean, maybe not everyone waits till the last day.
I was overwhelmed by it today.
Sorry, Miriam.
Is that a big no? I mean, I don't know if Mallory's
Sarah.
Mallory or Sarah?
We've heard from Minnesota Composting Council and WRA, and I think there's one more set of initial feedback, but it's been pretty limited so far.
Okay, pretty minimal. Okay, Sarah, you had a comment?
Thank you. Sarah Bixby, NWRA. So I appreciate John's comment about, maybe needing to invite some cities. In our case, I mean, how many haulers do you want to participate? And are they all in one workshop, or do you want them spread across several? Because I can see several wanting to weigh in. And a little bit of guidance for me as to, are there any limitations on, or will you just do an individual meeting with NWRA members?
That's an interesting question.
I think we can talk about that a little bit more. I'm just, one of the groups is haulers. So I think we would have to have the conversation. Now, Minnesota's NWRA members, though, if I recall, is about 7 to 10 members, and we have many more haulers. So I think we may have to reach out to them. Not all are NWRA members. I think, and I'm just, again, this workshopping, speaking out loud, no agency position. We are going to want to keep these smaller. If we get too big, I just don't think we're going to be able to have the back and forth. So that's where I think we may have to rely on sometimes, like an NWRA saying, you pick 3 to 4 folks, and we have to, put together a couple more haulers from outside of the NWRA sphere that we may have some contacts with. I mean, we can go back there, or if you know too, of folks who are willing to help participate in these type of conversations. I think the counties and cities would know some of those conversations to be had. I think that's how we're going to have to do it. I think, Sarah, we just need to have an internal conversation real quick. Sarah Bigby, sorry, just to get you numbers, but we will definitely, we can work through you, or we can work through the Minnesota chapter too, because I think Phil also was the one who signed the letter. We'll figure that out.
And Sarah Edwards?
Yeah, I mean, from our side, I think we had a staggered approach to issuing these. So if, I think if we can try and do the cities and counties next week, that would be great. And then the following week, do the haulers. And then if need be, the following week, if the same week or the following week, the facilities and end markets. I think that would be our preference, so that we can get moving with some of the ones where we're going to want the, where there's the most stakeholders, I suppose, to chase and get responses from. That would be optimum for us.
I am really grateful that the PCA and Mia, that you're willing to dig into this in a pretty short period of time. I know that the members of the advisory board will be participating, but it's not just, you need that larger group that can do a more of a condensed, larger group condensed, for the review and for the comments. I do think, and so I appreciate that. As I said, coming into here, I think much of it is not that one question is not well stated or not. It's how you, the information and how you have the question so that you can do a broader thing rather than kind of the pigeonhole, which is what this felt like. It felt like, okay, if you don't fit there, then I don't know how you answer. And so I think that there's a way to do this that will make it easier and also offer some flexibility. And I know, doing this when you're doing something that's a survey that's online is very different, trying to put it onto paper as well. So I recognize that. But I do think that there's a way that you're going to be able to get more valuable or consistent information with some flexibility in how to, where the work is done, who is doing it. Is it a business and municipality that are working together? Is it, public schools and the county that's working together? I mean, whoever it is, because there's very little of this whole system that doesn't have partnerships in it or contracts within it, and trying to make sure that you get the correct data. Again, I think we all agreed from before even that this data, this the base of this data is going to be so critically important as we go forward with implementation of this statute. John.
John Polk, when is this data actually going to be used? I'm just trying, we have timelines on from this date to this date, we're going to do the survey.
Right.
But do we really have to rush to get all that information from a certain facility or a certain sector by that date? Or is there a date So I thought there was later on follow-ups and site visits and things like that. I know you want to check things off the list, but
No.
for like these mixed use facilities, that, to me, that's gonna be a hard one to do. Because you're gonna need guidance on how, just to uniformly every mixed use facility, how do I report so you get the same data? You know, why have that at the same cutoff as a straight compost facility or a facility that just does single stream recycling? You know, a transfer station's just moving waste and recyclables. It almost seems like you have another category, which is those mixed facilities where you're gonna have to do a deeper dive to be able to extract the information you need.
Right. Yeah, the survey is the first, but the follow-up and where you need more additional information. Sarah Edwards, do you want to try to tackle that one? Because you're absolutely right. It's not going to be, okay, you get the survey, you respond, boom.
Well, it almost seems like you could do a preliminary survey for those. And that's
Yeah, I mean,
the follow-up.
Yeah, if you can provide us with a list of those, you know, if we've got, some of my team may have those at the top of their head, I don't, but if we have a list of those, we can look at whether we do just initial outreach and talk them through survey questions and then leave it to you guys to fill it in a way that's convenient for you guys. You know, for you guys, we've got no problem with doing that, but historically, as soon as you start pushing back deadlines, everyone gets pushed back and we can't have deadlines being missed. We effectively have February and March to get data through primary research at the same time as carrying out secondary research. We effectively then have about a month to review all that information and ask additional questions. We then have 2 months to do all the analysis, and we still have a lot of questions that we've discussed today around how you define, you know, what's in scope, what is the denominator, how we set rates, how we measure rates, all of those things. And so time is not currently on our side, and to do all of that analysis we do need to have some data that we can rely on. So I'm very happy if there's a select number of kind of bespoke areas that we should take a different approach to, and maybe if that's something you can provide again before we have those workshops, we can look at how we address that quickly so that we can try and get everything moving at the same time.
Okay, I have Kirk, but I do want to comment that it sounds like you've got sorry. It sounds like it isn't just answer the survey and we're done. It's that there's some additional time.
I was just, I guess this is why we brought to the stakeholder meeting, but maybe one of the first questions should be list out or check, you know, what facility is doing what. And if you hit more than 3, you're just thinking out loud, you know, and you dumb down the survey because you know you're gonna have to drill down on it later. And that's the follow-up. But I don't have a list to give Sarah, you know, of all the mixed use facilities. I don't know if they all do, but that's what the survey could tell you.
So that would be the first.
Add a survey question or.
Add a survey question about.
Before you get too far into it.
Correct. That makes sense, Sarah?
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I mean, it just means obviously when we do that, we have to have a series of surveys, and that first survey needs to be completed, you know, very quickly, as in 2 weeks. No more or less probably so we get an initial understanding of which ones are mixed use and therefore what is the next logical set of questions we need to ask them. We can't allow them 4 weeks to do that because we've actually only got a total of 8 weeks to get all of the survey questions back, and then to start reviewing them to ask additional questions.
Okay, I think answers your question too.
But just to add on to what Sarah was saying, just a reminder, the draft needs assessment will be done by September, because we have the whole rest of that year that we'll have out for public comment, revisions and that. So that's why data early here this first quarter, analysis and report writing, because you know, quite quickly before we know it, the report is out. But I think we've got some flexible pieces, and I know we're not able to go through the whole presentation, but Sarah has some of those slides too, if folks are interested to just dive into a little bit more of what's being done and what.
Okay, so if I can summarize, I will try. That there needs to be work done on the survey. One of the things is to figure out, one of the first questions is, how many things do you do and how would you fit into these categories? I don't know if it's correct to say dumbing down, but it kind of is. I mean, I'm saying simplify, so that you can get to the basic information and then you can drill down further into the survey to get what you need from that particular entity. Instead of asking them very specific questions about exactly how you do something, it's whether or not you do it. And then you can get to the how and what the data is in that area.
Or how they want you to break it up.
Right, how you want to break it.
So that you're getting the same information from everybody.
Right,
using the same
and it's not duplicated. So, and it is going to be primarily for those that are doing something that is not a single stream, I guess is the way I would put it. Because the survey could be pretty simple for those that are doing something that's just one thing and not multiple things. Okay. As my mom would say, is that clear as mud? So, anyhow, I really am very appreciative of PCA and Nomia for working through this, because I think it's absolutely critical. I think we all agree on that. Okay, anything else on this subject? Ryan. O'Gara.
Not on the board.
Oh, I'm sorry, Ryan. We have public comment coming up. But right now we have to have folks that are on the board. So I'll put you first on the list for public comment, which actually, if we don't have any more questions. I think we decided that they weren't going to present.
I think we could, sorry, Chair, Sarah, I think maybe we can go over some of the timeline and just high level needs assessment from your slides too, just to give folks a context of how this is all going together and what are some of the deliverables along the stages, so that folks can kind of vision this. That might help too as we talk about timeline. We won't be able to get into, Sarah and her team have put together parts in the board packet that's more detailed. Some of the earlier slides we've shown, but I think we're just going to do some high level ones real quick here. And Sarah's got it up.
Yeah.
That's okay,
So,
Board Chair.
I mean,
Yes, absolutely. Thank you.
yeah, so this timeline just sort of has, as we've discussed, really the kind of primary research through surveys and interviews with interested parties. So you can see that we have really wanting to get these done by the end of March, really, with some kind of further conversations going on until the beginning of May. The next slide, there's actually a bit of a gap here, because the next slide just actually talks a little bit about actually the report drafting. So between effectively, as we get data in here and into end of February, March, we'll be analysing that data, and that will start flowing into the model. And as I say, we need this information not only to re-baseline and understand the current state, what's happening now, but we need to start making assumptions about what the future looks like. And so that, there's going to be a lot of decision making around, okay, we're going to increase access to all the properties and have these types of services. What is that going to do for a recycling rate? We're going to collect these types of material in these years, in the first 5 years. What is that going to do to the recycling rate? So there's this huge amount of decision making that needs to happen, over the next few months, that will feed into us to be able to model the future state as well. So at the end of April, and in earnest, really, we'll be to the sort of July. In July, we've got pretty much 2 months to do all the modelling, the revised modelling of the current state, based on the primary data that we collect, and then starting to model the future state, and obviously coming back to you with some of the outcomes from that future state modelling, so that you can feed into that as well. And then we've got a report drafting, and then this obviously just gives you, just shows you effectively the time we've got to write the report for the MPCA to review and discuss how the advisory board feeds into that, and then the public consultation period as well. So there is we really only have sort of 6 months to do this work and the analysis before we start working on putting it down on paper and revising that and get it into state so that it can go into public comment. In terms of the needs assessment, I think this is kind of a very high level approach, and this is kind of what it was in our proposal to the state. So we're going to do, obviously, task 1, some additional research. We have to then analyse that baseline or the current system again using that primary data, and then we have to really, while we're collecting data from the primary research, we need to start thinking about what that future state looks like. So we need to scope out what the components of the future is going to look like, and therefore how they might lead to increases in recycling rates, reuse systems. So we have to scope that out before we start doing the analysis. And there's a significant amount of assumptions within that. I mean, just, you know, on the reuse, refill side of things and wider source reduction, we've just finished, you know, working for 6 months with Cal Recycle on just a needs assessment that focused on source reduction. So we have a team that's going to come in and just work on the source reduction component and the reuse refill. And so that will really delve into what products and why could be lightweighted and what the impact that might have on what products and packaging can't be lightweighted for whatever reasons because they provide functional benefits to the products that they're containing. And then on top of that, how do you layer specific requirements for packaging reuse and refill throughout the system as well. So it's a really complex, and all of those things add up. So when you start looking at a future recycling rate, you need to incorporate what you might want to do in terms of a future reuse and wider source reduction, because that all has an impact on the denominator and the volume or the amount of material by unit weight and volume that is allowable to be used against those calculations. So once we've started, we're then looking at the same time really at the proposed plans and metrics to measure, which is what Peter touched on. Where do we measure? How do we measure? What information do we need to measure? Is that information even going to be available? And at what point in time will it be available? And then looking at the kind of third-party evaluation certification. So effectively but there's some components that we need to look at in terms of like recycled content certification, but also how we kind of look at responsible markets. But what else in the system do we need certification for? What certifications are out there and how might they be applied in Minnesota? And then we also have to look at some of the factors to help develop those collection lists and make some recommendations of what falls into curbside collection lists, alternative collection mechanisms. And that all will be based on potentially decisions that are made in terms of how those materials might best be collected in the future, either through the curb or through alternative drop-off facilities, store take back, etc. And then we obviously have to make some recommendations on methodologies and reimbursement rates, which is something that we would obviously be working with the AA on. And all of that then has to feed into the needs assessment. So while the surveys are really critical in getting information on that, there is still a significant amount of other work that needs to be done alongside that, so that we can make, and MPCA and the board can make some strategic decisions as to what that future system might look like, and therefore the targets that might be set for CAA to achieve through the program plan. Any questions?
Doesn't appear to be.
Okay. I think the rest of the slides go into quite a bit of detail, so I don't think it's really worth going into those now. As I said, I think a lot of the key questions that we still need to answer. I mean, I think Kate Davenport made some really important points around definitions. There is still some need to look at definitions in other pieces of legislation and how they're pulled through, because we do need to think about that when we're developing the needs assessment as well. So there's work to be done on how to define components of the system too.
Miriam.
Sarah, I'm just looking through the slides that we're not going through because you don't have time. And I really like this best practices for engagement one about design the survey for ease of clarity, reduce friction. I don't know if you want to jump to that one. The one thing that I have concerns about is you have ensure accuracy and completeness. Use validation checks, prevent skipped mandatory fields or illogical answers. I would just recommend, kind of per John's comment, to really allow a lot of liberty with skipping fields, because I just know from other surveys that a lot of times I would be like, I don't know how to answer this question. And if it's a mandatory question, like, you just don't finish the survey because you can't do it. So I would just be really cautious about anything that you make mandatory, and just know that that would be on your list of who to reach back out to if there's like skipped fields that you want, like, or have a like an option to check for callback or whatever.
Callback, yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
Kate Davenport from Recycling Partnership. Just to add to that specifically, and I'm sure this can come out in some of the working groups, but John, your points made me think about this. A lot, like, every city groups costs a little bit differently, and so they may skip questions because costs are embedded in other places. So I'm just super highlighting what Miriam said and be very conscious of that. Like every city kind of can or hauler frames costs a little bit differently. And so you just need to be really aware of that, which will result in skipping questions.
John.
Yeah, and if it's something you need, but it's gonna hold up the survey, maybe have an option that they can leave it blank and still submit. But it triggers a follow-up to go back, and then there can be a conversation about how do I answer that? I know it's more work for you, but I think you'll get a better end product of it.
Yep.
In our group, even though we're being told we don't have a lot of time for doing things, we keep going back to the data needs to be right or usable. And that's kind of that push and pull on the timeline versus getting quality. So I know you want to get as much information as you can, but don't. If you can skip a couple of things, it just triggers a follow-up and they can still close that report and get it to you. Getting 80% up front and having to go back and get 20% a little later, I think it made things a lot easier.
Okay, and it looks like Shoshana has both hands up, so I'm going to call on her.
Oh, is it both hands?
Well, it says two there, so.
Oh, so weird.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Everyone.
Three would really confuse you. She got three hands up.
Okay, Shoshana, I was supposed to call on you second, but I'm just going to go ahead and call on you.
Okay, sorry about that. Hopefully this is a quick one. This is Shoshana with AFMPA. I'm wondering if there's a plan, if there are any respondents who ask to receive the survey in a PDF form. I know we've run into sometimes having respondents when we send out surveys who want to be able to look at the whole survey so that they can gather answers from within or go to their corporate or legal counsel before having to answer. So is there an option for that as you are gathering your responses?
John, did you have something to say on that?
Oh, yeah. Well, I was trying to whisper it to you so we could just. But even if there's just, I think what she's trying to get to is some people want to be able to see all the questions. They can do it, when they can, and then get back to it. You're trying to make everything nice to do it on a phone or whatever, but some people want to actually see the whole thing. And so maybe if you just have a print feature.
Yeah.
Instead of a PDF, but they have the ability to print it off a computer and they can print all the questions ahead of time. That might get to like Shoshana's asking.
Okay, I think that's a great idea. Okay, Sarah.
I was just going to say that we will be able to see. So I think that's a great idea. I think MPCA can answer, but I think their system allows for that. We've done that before, where we've just sent it as a PDF as well as the link to the survey. I think we will be able to see who started the survey and how far they've got along on the survey. So if we can see someone sitting there maybe not being able to finish, we can send some personalized messages to say, are you getting on okay? Do you need any help with a survey? We can see where they're stopping on the survey. And then we also wanted to try and instead of getting everyone to respond in this same way, have the ability for people to upload information if that was easier for them. So our team is very used to using lots of data in very different formats and having to ask questions around it to ensure that we are able to compare like for like. And so, we wanted to try and balance the fact that if people could just upload a copy of their cost data, whatever that might be for the city, with the cost of engagement, with the cost of labor, with those costs, they could do that without having to fit in specific screens. So I think that's just something to worthwhile thinking about when we go into the workshops next week and the week after.
And I also assume that at some point you can save your work and come back to it.
Yeah.
Okay. I have done a couple of surveys where it's like, if you don't finish it, then you got to start over. It makes no sense to me. Okay. All right. I think we've got a pretty good idea here, I guess, as far as what the expectation from the advisory board members is that, one, you will provide comments by tomorrow to Mallory on what was provided to us. Whether they are specific or broad in nature is up to you. Just so it will be helpful as PCA is putting together these workshops to say, okay, what is it that we think needs to happen here? Also, if you could, as long as you're gonna be referring or sending something to Mallory, if you could indicate whether or not you are willing to be on in one of the workshop discussions, that would be helpful as well.
Can I?
Go ahead.
Just a logistical question. Will Mallory, sorry, maybe this already said, send out when the workshops are? Are we just saying, yes, we're willing to be in one of the I'm sorry,
Well,
it's just a little chicken.
schedule because they just came up with this idea today. They don't have the.
Okay, you're right.
timeline.
Sorry. I feel like I'm.
But they, yes, it makes sense. You'd have to know. I mean, you could say, I'm interested, but
Just
whether or
not
not you
knowing.
can participate depends on the schedule.
Okay.
Okay, so everybody got that? You got your homework assignment?
Yes.
Okay, is there anything else, Sarah?
Nothing from my side, no. Thank you.
Okay. Mallory, did you have something?
I was just trying to write up kind of the process. We had originally intended to do some beta testing of the surveys once they got into the survey format. So I think there's kind of like two asks, is whether or not you'd be able to do a beta test of the survey in a very short notice, but then an ask if you'd like to provide specific input on a certain survey. And then we will be scheduling those for next week and the following week, so we can try and stay on schedule as much as possible.
So those would happen concurrent with the workshops?
I think afterwards, the beta testing would be, we'd collect the information from the workshops and the written comments, refine the questions, put them in the format. It sounds like it'll probably be multiple choice, multiple adventure, depending on how you answer things. You might get tiered to other questions, and we would just need some folks to test that out to make sure it's working and makes sense before we subject everyone to the survey.
Okay, so the workshops, it sounds like, would more than likely be next week, so that you'd have the time to do the beta testing and things the second week. Make sense to everyone? Again, thank you. I know it's a heavy lift that we just asked. Okay, is there anything else on this board item? Not seeing anyone's hand go up. Okay, we are now, well, now we're going to get done early. Okay. The next thing on our agenda is the public comment period. And that is, if you want to, this is the opportunity for folks that are not on the board, that are participating, that if you want to make public comment, you can do so. We ask that you keep it, I think, to 3 minutes, and state who you are and who you are representing, and then make your comment. And I think I forgot who it is. Ryan O'Gara, did you want to make public? Okay, good. You have your hand up. Okay, go ahead, Ryan. Identify yourself and who you're with. 2 minutes.
Oh, sorry. I just need.
Just a second. We won't start the 2 minutes until you can actually talk.
Okay, you should be able to unmute.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
All right. Well, first of all, thank you for accommodating that those workshops. I think they'll be very productive. There's large concerns. I'm not speaking for the haulers in their entirety, even though we are an NWRA member, but we share a lot of the same concerns, especially like with cost data. It's very important that that is protected, non-public data. It's the last thing we would want is for that information to get out to the public or to the pro. And so, and some of my quite like, on the cost section for haulers, there's stuff where you want the all-in cost per route for residential recycling. And then it's including tipping fees, maintenance, is it an all-in cost? So we can, certainly feel it'd be easier for us to report that, because frankly, I don't see how what Waste Connections pays for labor in any way helps this process or informs this process or is relevant or germane to it. I think it is important that you guys know what the cost is, as Peter said, so that they can budget for it. And I think the haulers are fully prepared to do that, provided that we get those protections. And at least some of the conversation here today, comments from Kirk, I think alleviate some of those concerns that the state indeed is going to protect that data. Some of the language there is uncomfortable just in the sense that, well, we can request that it's not public, but then PCA says, no, it's not. We're giving it away to everybody. So there's questions like that I think a workshop would help to cover. There's also just questions in here that really just, I don't think makes sense. Like there's questions related to how many routes do you have? What do you mean by that? Like how many individual truck routes that we have? And one, how is that germane? I can definitely see how households is a valuable factor if we're going to have reimbursements based off of that. There's other questions such as what is the set out rate? Well, I don't know. How are you defining set out rate? Does that mean if somebody doesn't put their card out once a month that they're not participating, or how are we measuring that? Or if somebody puts it out once but doesn't put it out the rest of the year, are they participating or not? There's questions like that. I'll also echo that all of the stuff relating to commercial needs to come out because that's not in the statute. If you need to reword the questions to say residential, including multifamily and all the school institutions and nonprofits to do that, even though they're technically commercial, fine, but we're not going to be providing data related to commercial accounts because it's outside the scope. And furthermore, just I think there's a lot of questions that are just not, I don't see how they help the process, such as like, let's say we service a school district and we have a couple accounts, elementary school and whatever. Are you really asking the haulers to try and find out what the student enrollment is and divide and what, even knowing that data, what the cost per student is? How does that help this process, or how is that going to even in any way inform the reimbursement? And lastly, on the education outreach, like I say, to me, it doesn't seem relevant what Waste Connections spends on staffing costs for our education efforts. I just don't see how it's relevant. Got other concerns about some of the details in the facility questions, but I'll stop there. I'm over my time. Thank you again for accommodating. I think the workshops will be productive.
Thank you. Is there anyone else that wishes to make public comment? Anyone else? Raise your hand and we will unmute you. And third and final call for additional public comment. Okay, seeing none, public comment period then is closed. Thank you, Ryan. I think that we've got a lot on the plate here again. This work, the early part of the work on anything like as big as this independent producer responsibility law is what is really time consuming and sometimes can feel like we're nitpicking a little bit, but the fact is the end product is a direct impact on what the data, what goes in and what comes out. And so I appreciate the time. I appreciate the efforts, the additional help that we're going to be getting to make sure that that survey has the flexibility and the understandability to make sure that we're getting good data back that is consistent. And obviously, again, the idea of the confidential or non-public data, you don't put the data in and then ask it to be non-public. That's not the process because it doesn't work once you put it in. And so there is a process and a very distinct process for making sure that you get that okay ahead of time if you, and your understanding of why you feel it should be non-public to begin with. Better to do that at the beginning as you're looking and doing the beta testing than after something is already out there. Although again, public data taken very seriously, non-public data is really important to industry. It's important to everyone, but it truly has to be non-public. Okay. Okay, Ryan, we're done with public comment.
Yeah, I know. I just wanted to jump in. I also have to reiterate John, or I think what John Steiner was saying too. Coming up, even to provide this data is a small undertaking. It is an undertaking, and so the sooner that, and the more time that we have to, we absolutely need to have a PDF that has all the questions ahead of time so we can get all of those answers. We can't have a survey where we're going through and, oh, we got to this question. Okay, now we need 3 weeks to get the IT people to come up with the report to do this. So all those things, are not small processes for us to do. So any accommodation there would be greatly appreciated. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, John.
Are we done with everything else?
I think so.
Okay. It seems weird that we're finishing early, but I'll make this comment. Do we need to have more meetings set up on the schedule? And we kind of blew through this meeting because we skipped most of the overview because we didn't have time. It just kind of feel like we're going to get into the same position we did at the end of 2025, that we're trying to cram too many things in. Even if we have dates on the calendar that don't get used, or they're used for ad hoc committees or these other things, I think it makes sense to have some of those times carved out ahead of time. It's a lot easier to cancel a meeting that's on the calendar than trying to say, oh, no, now we need to meet to discuss this. We're behind on this.
Well, when we know that there's an end product that's got to be done by a certain time, I would think having an additional meeting or two, based on the timeline that, Mia laid out even, or with the workshops and so forth, to make sure that we are up to date, and so that we're not, ending up with something, quite honestly, like today, where you go, okay, tomorrow you have to have this information. And so I am certainly open to having additional meetings. I don't think that once we get through this, there's a lot of work that's going to be done here in a short period of time. Generally speaking, I think we will be going to monthly meetings, but maybe for the next couple of months, we should have more than that. What are folks' thoughts? Any objection to that? Clearly, we have to have something that's on the agenda that is either actionable or not necessarily a vote, but something that you're saying, hey, we need this from the advisory board.
I mean, maybe instead of extra meetings, if there's a point where we know we're going to be reviewing a key deliverable, can we add an extra hour to those meetings? Because sometimes that's easier than all finding time in our calendars to get together again. And so I think that probably would have solved the issue today as well. It's like, we don't necessarily, but I think that it would be we'd all rather schedule that extra hour and not need it than, the other way around.
I'm just anticipating me again, come back and say, we're having an issue with this.
Yeah.
How do you want us to address it? Something that isn't on our radar.
Well, how about if we do this on basically a case by case basis? Because I think this survey is going to be very critical. And I think even having a shorter meeting and to say, okay, this is what we've come up with. You've gone through the workshops. You've gone through everything that you need to do. You're doing beta testing. To then have at least a touching base with the advisory board so that we know where we're at with it would be helpful. So to me, that is a deliverable. That is going to be, is it 3 weeks from now? Or is it more than that, or less than that? The timelines.
Well, they're putting it out in February, so I think that's more like a week or two from now. And then when I looked at their timeline, it was through March. It looked like that they're getting responses.
They're meeting with stakeholders through May.
Okay, so if we want to have another look at this survey as an advisory board, do you want to have something sent out, or do you want to have a meeting in 2 weeks? That's what it comes down to, specifically for this purpose. I think the survey is important enough that we need to have the input however we get it.
My opinion, you put something on the calendar. If you don't need it, you don't use it. But if it's asked for, if there's an issue with it, look at it and have strong feelings about it again. But yeah, there's something set up, a date to go to do that.
Okay. I think the survey deserves to have another look before it's totally out there. Sarah.
Sarah Bixby.
Sorry, there's too many Sarahs. I should have been clearer. Okay.
Yeah, it's also possible that we wouldn't need a whole 3-hour block, maybe an hour. And that could make it easier to schedule and force us to stay on topic.
And I think we could do that one. Even though I prefer to be in person, we could certainly do that one virtually.
What would we aim to get out of a meeting in 2 weeks? Because if we give feedback that would require changes to be made, they would have to push back the dates again. So I'm not sure if I guess I would just need to know what
Okay.
the objective.
If there's serious concerns, then it would maybe be pushed. I don't know, there would be a long time. I mean, if we're talking a few days, that's, I don't think, a big deal. But if there's a major problem with it, it's better to know it then than to come back here and trying to be an advisory board on something that doesn't have the data that we think it needs. So I do think that, yes, there should be room for potential changes. But I don't think it would be something that would have a huge impact on the timeline. It shouldn't. And I only said 2 weeks because I think that's the timeline that they're saying they have to have it all ready to go.
Kirk from MPCA. Let us do a little bit of refiguring with the schedules here. We're doing some plan right here. Maybe the 4th might be a date that would work, but I think we just need to do a little bit more planning. Well, we've said workshops in a week, and that, just as things get pulled together, it's hard for us to give you a date right now. But if it's okay, if we can keep working with you, chair and co-chair, on some options, and it may have to be all virtual, just given the last minute nature of it, and we can communicate through email just a little bit more. But I think we need to do a little mapping out, since we just built this new process and we don't really know what the dates are on it.
Okay.
And what I'm hearing, I think, if there's an interest from the advisory board to do that, I think we just need to get back to you with a little bit more on timing.
John?
Yeah, I guess going to Gabby's comment, I think we're expecting changes in the questions, because that's where it has the stakeholder meetings. So this would just be, if there's going to be changes we expect will be coming, because that's why we'd be doing this, then you'd have another look at it to see, is that adequate? We want to provide a tweak or something like that to make it better, would be the purpose in it. If it impacts our schedule, we've kind of already decided, I think, although we didn't vote on it, both the stakeholder groups or small groups, but I think we kind of collectively made that clear.
Okay, so we're not talking about a long meeting. We're talking about something that says, okay, this is what happened as a result in these 2 weeks here, and we wanted you to see it. I think that would be really helpful. Okay, so I know that you didn't make a commitment to February 4th, but I've still put it down. But that's around that timeline. Probably. Okay, I feel like I've put people through the mill here today, but appreciate the work that's being done and the participation of the entire advisory board. Okay, any other business to come before the board? Hearing none, we are adjourned. Thank you.